In this section, we are going to focus on creating a database abstraction layer for the application that we're developing. I mentioned previously that we are going to have support for PDO and also MySQLi API. So we need a way to be able to ensure that we are not repeating ourselves, because we want to be able to write a create statement, for example, that can be used by these two different APIs. So it doesn't matter if I'm using PDO or if I'm using MySQLi, it should just work. So we're going to have to really plan out the way that we want to structure the application in this section. We're going to lay the groundwork and ensure that we are actually writing unit tests and then implementing the code. That way we ensure that our application works 100% the way that we want it to work. And also we are doing something that's going to be really robust and really not tightly coupled. You can decide to change the way that you connect your database at runtime. I want to use PDO, or I want to use MySQLi, or you want to use something different. We're just going to provide the architecture so that things are really in the way that it should be, in object-oriented way. All right, so we're going to quickly have a look at a UML diagram that reflects what we're going to be actually building when we start writing code. Okay, so I have a UML diagram here, and if you take a closer look at the diagram, you can see that we have two segments. So let's start from the very right hand side, where we have the abstract connection and the database connection interface. So we are having to implement this kind of architecture so that it is really flexible for us to decide which connection we want to use at runtime. So we have here a database connection interface, which is being implemented by PDO connection, MySQLi connection, and probably any other class or type of connection type that you want to use. And this interface is going to enforce two contracts. One is a connect method and the other one is get connection method, which means that no matter which type of API that we're using to connect to the database, it should be able to connect and then also be able to return us back that connection. So the instance of that connection would be returned back to us wherever we are actually going to use this connection. And here we have an abstract class which is being extended by both MySQLi connection and PDO connection. So we're not talking about code right now, but basically if you look at it, you can begin to see how things are going to be structured, and you can see that the application is loosely coupled. And then coming to the other diagram, you can see here that we have a query builder, we have a query builder interface, and then we have two concrete classes. We have the MySQLi query builder, and then we have the PDO query builder. And you can see that the query builder class doesn't really care which connection we're using. It simply accepts a connection interface. Okay, so once we pass it the connection interface, it is able to pass on that connection to where it is being needed within the classes that's going to be extending the query builder, which is basically done through dependency injection. So what we are trying to do here, if you've heard about Solid before, and there are a few principles there that should guide us when we actually build applications. One, we have the DIP principle, which is the dependency invasion principle. This basically means that we should program to an interface, not to a concrete implementation. And in our use case here, we ensure that when we need to inject something into a class, instead of passing in a concrete type like a PDO query builder or PDO connection directly, we actually type into to expect the interface. This way we are actually satisfying that principle, dependency invasion principle, DIP, which means that we should program to an interface, because if we put a concrete class here, it means that we cannot achieve polymorphism. Then we are going to be rewriting a lot of things again. But if we put an interface here, if we say this should expect an interface, then it doesn't really care what you are actually passing through to it. It only cares that it satisfies the contract that is defined by the interface. So with this, you can already see that our application is not tied together, it's loosely coupled. We can actually change things at runtime, and things are just going to happen so smoothly. And this is a knowledge that you can transfer to other aspects of your application that you're building. You can see what we've been doing so far. When we built a logger, we had a logger interface, and whenever we want to actually use that to log, we are going to inject that interface. We are not going to inject the concrete logger. And this is satisfying the dependency invasion principle. All right, so let's get started in the next video by writing a test and then starting to build the connection class.